Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. And today a look at the EarMen TR-Amp, or TR-Amp as I believe it's called, and I'll get to the naming of that in a second. What this is, it's a portable headphone amplifier and DAC all in one unit, very similar to something like the iFi iDSD Nano or even say a Chord Mojo. So the question for me for this review is whether or not a product like this even has a reason to exist in today's world where most of us are using smartphones, wireless and the like. On top of that, of course, is the question of whether it's any good, how it compares to its competitors, and whether I think it's worth buying. So without any further ado, my name's Lachlan, let's jump into the review and find out. The EarMen TR-Amp retails for about $249 US or just under 490 Australian dollars. So in the scheme of portable DACs and amps, it's relatively affordable and in theory should perform well given the heritage of EarMen, which is an offshoot of Auris Audio, and also the performance of the recently reviewed EarMen Eagle and EarMen Sparrow. So I was expecting good things in terms of sound quality, but whether or not the TR-Amp could win me over in terms of whether there's a use for it and a purpose for it in today's world, that's a whole nother question. Before I try to answer that question, let's talk a bit more about what you get when you buy an EarMen TR-Amp. Probably should mention before I start talking about the bits and pieces, the reason I'm calling it the TR-Amp is that it's written TR-Amp, but based on some of EarMen's other products, like the Donald DAC for instance, I do believe they're actually having a bit of fun calling it the TR-Amp, and I'm wondering if there's a Disney reference going on potentially, maybe Lady in the Tramp, I'm not sure and I haven't found any references to it directly. But for me, I'm going to call it the TR-Amp because it's so much easier than saying TR-Amp all the time. So let's talk more about the TR-Amp. What you get when you buy the TR-Amp is the DAC and amp itself, of course, and also a USB-C cable. Because on the back here, and I'm going to jump around a bit here, on the back we've got two USB-C sockets, one for data and one for charging. So you can charge it at the same time, or you can obviously just plug it into charge, take it away, plug it in and use it using the internal battery. Also on the back while we're here, there's a switch to change between preamp output and direct output. So you can use this as a preamp or a dedicated DAC. I'll talk more about the sound quality of those shortly. And then finally, you've got a pair of RCA outputs for those preamp or DAC duties. Swinging back around to the front, we've got volume control, which is also your power switch. We've got a single-ended 3.5mm and a single-ended 6.3mm output. And finally, a tiny little hole, which you'll see in the glamour video, which is used for the indicator light. That's going to indicate when the unit is on and also when it's doing MQA. So for MQA playback, which this is fully capable of, and I'll talk about that in a second too, this will turn to a red indicator light when MQA signals are coming through. So let's just recap what we've got so far. We've got a portable device that's very similar in size and shape to an iFi Nano iDSD. It's running a Sabre DAC on the inside. It's capable of every format under the sun, all the way up to DSD and high sample rate PCM. So it's very capable, it's relatively portable, or maybe transportable is a better term, and it's also a nice looking and feeling device. It's been well made. Having recently reviewed the Sparrow, I was kind of surprised that there wasn't a balanced output on this, and instead you've just got two variants of single-ended outputs. Through those single-ended outputs, the TR-Amp can produce 350 milliwatts into a load of 32 ohms. So that's not hugely powerful, but it is powerful enough for most headphones you're likely to use in this transportable/portable type setup. Speaking of portable, I didn't mention before that something else that's in the box of the TR-Amp are a range of rubber bands. You remember those? So rubber bands designed to connect the TR-Amp to whatever your source device is, your transport. Now, once upon a time, that made a huge amount of sense, but these days, most devices on the market are going to be touchscreen. And I don't know about you, but I've never found a solution with a touchscreen device strapped to another device where the bands don't get in the way of the touchscreen. On top of that, as I've already alluded to, there are other great products on the market like EarMen's own Sparrow and Eagle that really take portability to another level by being so much more compact. So I really question the purpose and the value of the Tramp, but let's continue on because if it sounds amazing, there just might be a reason for it to exist. In terms of usability, the Tramp is very versatile in the fact that it will run IEMs or full-size headphones very happily. There's a little bit of channel imbalance on the volume control down low, but it's not too bad and I never had trouble getting enough volume range to make it work for me with any of my headphones or earphones. The power output, as I've already mentioned, is plenty for everything I've tried with it, and the fact that it's also a preamp or a pure DAC is a really nice bonus. So versatility is high, and I can even see some people running this as a micro desktop DAC solution. So if you're looking for a really small footprint solution for your desktop, this might be where the Tramp comes into play. I really don't see it being a valid transportable or portable solution, but as a micro desktop solution, it might just have a place. And in order to do that, it has to sound great. So let's chat a bit now about the sound. Not dissimilarly to the Sparrow that I've reviewed recently, the sound from the Tramp is strong, authoritative, and enjoyable. It's very engaging. It's refined, but it's not smoothed off. It's not blunted, it's not overly rich or thick, but it's definitely smooth enough that you can really enjoy it with a whole range of sources. If you plug in a headphone like an HD800 for instance, or maybe one of the peaky Beyerdynamic models like a DT990 or even some of the 880 versions, you're not going to have your ears bleeding as a result of the Tramp being too kind of sharp and edgy as some people might think of Sabre DAC units as being. The Sabre DAC implementation in the Tramp is really excellent, and much like the Eagle and the Sparrow, it comes across with a sense of refinement and clarity and precision without ever getting edgy. Listening to Nubia by Yossi Horikawa, one thing I really noticed was that the Tramp excels with really detailed passages. It kept that beautifully separated and well layered no matter how busy the recording got. So that's definitely something it's got going for it, is that it's a well refined and well detailed unit that's able to reproduce music on par or at least close to some of the more affordable desktop stacks out there. Now at the moment I unfortunately don't have any of those really affordable desktop stacks here for me to compare it to, but based on memory I'd very comfortably choose the Tramp over some of those stacks that are out there. So for example, the Shit Modi and the Magni or Heresy lineups, I think this would be comparable to them, certainly in terms of the Heresy, which I wasn't a huge fan of. It's a good amp, but it wasn't great. I think I would put this up next to it. But again, it's not going to have the power of something like a mains powered device such as the Heresy or the Magni. Likewise, I do think the Tramp would compare pretty favourably to something like the Topping E30 and L30 or the D50S and the A50S. I'm not saying it's going to beat it, and I don't have them here to compare side by side, but again I think it's going to come close enough that the form factor and the fact that you don't need to plug it into mains power may be enough for some people to choose this over some of those stacks. That said, you are always going to get better power output and therefore likely slightly better precision and control from a fully mains powered desktop solution. So it's going to be a trade-off. I'm not saying this is going to beat those devices. What I'm saying is that it's worth considering if the form factor and versatility or portability is more important to you than having the absolute best you can in terms of sound quality within this budget sort of range. One final point on the sound before I move on to some comparisons is that the Tramp produces a really good sense of space in the soundstage. It's not quite up there with some of the best on the market that I've heard, and I'll get to that in a moment, but it does a very good job for a chip-based DAC. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll know that I've often found chip-based DACs tend to flatten the soundstage and make it more two-dimensional. The Tramp does a good job of keeping some sense of three-dimensionality as well as some width, and whilst it may not compete with the best of the best in that area, it's doing a really good job, particularly at the price point. So ultimately, this is a product that does sound great. It's got a form factor that is a bit outdated, but the performance of it certainly speaks for itself and holds its own. So let's say you're in the market for something like this and you're looking at a portable or semi-portable DAC and headphone amp. You might be considering EarMen's own Sparrow, maybe the Dragonfly Cobalt, and maybe this has snuck into the picture. Let's talk a bit about how each of them compares. If you've seen my review of the EarMen Sparrow, you'll know that in its balanced output mode, it comfortably beats the Dragonfly Cobalt. So I put it up next to the Tramp to see if it also bested the Tramp, once again being a single-ended only device similar to the Cobalt. What I found though was that the Tramp and the Sparrow are much closer in performance. The Sparrow soundstage is smaller than that from the Tramp, and it's also a little bit less three-dimensional. At first listen, the sound characteristics or the tonality of the Sparrow had me thinking it might have been a little bit more detailed. But once again, I think it's one of those tricks where the tonality of the Sparrow being slightly drier and the three-dimensionality of it being less means that you seem to perceive the details a bit stronger at first. But over time and listening to both thoroughly, what I found was that all of that detail was there in the Tramp, it just wasn't pushed at me quite as much. The Tramp's smoother, slightly more refined presentation allowed me to take in the details if I wanted to without having them jammed in my face as much. Now that's an over-exaggeration. Both products provide a relatively refined and smooth and enjoyable sound, but in comparison relatively between the two, the Tramp just does the refinement and the layering and the depth a little bit better than the Sparrow. The Sparrow therefore may initially sound a bit more detailed, but in reality I don't believe it is. What you're getting instead from the Tramp is a mid-range that's a bit smoother, a little tiny bit richer, but it's not thick in any way. It's just got a slightly more rich and full sound to the mid-range. It's probably more about weight than actual thickness, if that makes sense. And from that, you're also getting more mid-range texture. It's a tonality that I personally prefer because I think it brings us closer to a live, in-person experience of the music. But I can't stress enough that it's a pretty close call and they're very close in overall performance between the two. So much so that if you were using a pure balance setup, as I said in my review of the Sparrow, I think I'd still choose the Sparrow because it is so tiny. The Tramp is obviously slightly more versatile with its RCA out, its preamp capabilities and the like, but in terms of pure sound performance, I don't think I'd split it on that so much as on the use case that you have. So if you're going pure balanced and the size is of value to you, then I think the Sparrow wins. If you're going to be using single-ended and balanced, and or if you want that preamp type functionality, the Tramp's the clear choice. But what if cost is no object? Is this the best product on the market at doing what it does in this type of form factor? To work that out, I put the Tramp up next to what I think of as the best product in this segment, and that's the Chord Mojo. So both of these products are DACs and amps. The Mojo is not quite as clean if you want to use it as a DAC or a preamp because it's only got 3.5mm outputs. So you do have to adapt those with RCAs if you want to use it as a preamp. So in that regard, it's less versatile, but on the other hand, it's got optical and coaxial inputs, so that makes it more versatile from an input point of view. Putting aside those usability and connectivity differences, the big question is how do they sound? With the Mojo being about double the price of the Tramp, you'd expect it to be far better. And whilst it is better, I don't know that I would say it's worth double the price. The Mojo is still the one I would personally choose, but if you were on a tight budget, the Tramp's probably going to give you almost as much performance for your money and then allow you a bit more to spend on things like headphones or earphones. Specifically, what I heard when listening to the two was that the Mojo does produce a better sense of space, particularly depth, and also layering in the sound. The Mojo is a little bit smoother and warmer, but again, not too thick or rich in such a way that it kills the details. The details are still all there. And in fact, what it did show me was that the tonality of the Mojo is a step closer to reality, at least in my opinion. It's a step closer to reality again compared to the Tramp. And what I mean by a step closer again is the Sparrow is a touch dry and a little tiny bit analytical and artificial. The Tramp does a better job of that. The Mojo takes it one step further again. All three are excellent, so I'm nitpicking to split them here, but they're things that I did notice in my listening. The Mojo was to me the most lifelike and realistic sounding across multiple headphones and multiple earphones. The reason the Tramp has a slightly different tonal sound to the Mojo is that the upper mids and the lower treble have just a little bit of edge to them. It's very subtle, and it's not something you would notice if you're listening to it on its own, but in comparison I noticed that there was just a sense of emphasis coming through in the upper mids and lower treble. That's not to say that the frequency response is being boosted there, so much as the timbral qualities are a little bit different. As a result, the overall soundstage has a little bit less depth, as I've already mentioned, and once again, it does create a slightly greater sense of detail and a little bit more closeness to the sound, so therefore the soundstage becomes a bit more intimate and details feel a little bit more pushed at you. Again, it's not a bad thing, I'm just trying to find ways to separate the two. At this point in all of my testing, I'd kind of decided that I think the Tramp is a really good option. It's incredibly well priced for the performance it gives you, and whilst I don't see it as being a particularly useful product from a portable point of view, I definitely see it as being a nice option for, say, a bedside setup or a small compact desktop setup. I can see it being particularly useful if you're in an office type situation where you don't have a lot of space around you. You might be working in, say, a hot desk situation where you're moving from desk to desk and you want a decent sound solution. Having this in your bag could be the perfect answer so that whichever desk you sit at, you've always got great sound. But before I end it there, I want to talk briefly about the preamp output and the DAC output of the Tramp. I noticed that listed in the specs for the Tramp, it does say that there is a difference in the crosstalk between having the direct output and the preamp output. Now let me step back for a second and explain what I'm talking about. This switch on the back here that says pre-out or direct means that when it's in pre-out mode, the volume control adjusts what comes out of these RCAs. In direct mode, there is no volume control, so it's bypassing that volume pot and instead taking the signals straight from the DAC and out to whatever your external amplifier is. In theory, and indeed from the specifications, by bypassing the volume control, you should get better sound quality. And in my testing, I found that that is definitely the case. The Tramp works really nicely as a preamp. I tried it with my active speakers here, and it was beautiful. It's again not the last word, it's still got some limitations because it's a small compact device, but for what it is and for what you pay, it did a really nice job as a preamp. But I also tried it feeding an external headphone amplifier so that I could switch the direct mode on and bypass the volume control. And there was definitely a difference. It's not a huge difference, but it's there. So if you are looking to use this as a dedicated DAC, you will find benefits in switching off the preamp mode and just going direct. The good news is if you need the volume control, for example to drive active speakers, it still sounds great, even with that slight reduction in sound quality caused by a little bit higher crosstalk. The good news is if you do need to use it as a preamp, say to drive active speakers like I was, then it does still perform really well. There's a slight degradation in channel separation, but it's very minor and it's not something you'd notice unless you're flipping between direct and pre-out. So with all that in mind, I think the Tramp is a very good product for what it is. I think it's quite a niche product. I don't see it being something that's going to have high popularity in the way that something like the Sparrow or the Eagle might. But it's definitely worth considering if you're in the market for a compact desktop system or a system that you can easily chuck in your bag and take from hot desk to hot desk, or if you're traveling regularly and you want to be able to sit in the hotel room, or you're looking for, say, a bedside system. In that regard, it does work very, very nicely. If you're in the market for a product like this, I'll put a link down below where you can go and find out more. But for now, happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.